In 1620, over 100 pilgrims set sail across a storm-tossed ocean, leaving behind everything they knew, home, family, and safety, for a chance at freedom. They had a simple dream, to worship God in peace. But the New World was not welcoming. Freezing winters, scarce food, and disease threatened to wipe them out. Allies appeared, but so did danger in unexpected forms. Through every hardship, their faith and courage were tested. This is the story of survival, sacrifice, and hope. The story of the Pilgrims, whose journey gave rise to thanksgiving and a legacy that still inspires today. The year was 1620, and England was a land of kings, bishops, and strict laws that left little room for people who wanted to live by their own beliefs. Among them were the Pilgrims, men and women who longed to worship God in a way they felt was pure and honest. But in England, their faith was dangerous. The government demanded loyalty to the Church of England, and anyone who dared to resist risked punishment. Families gathered in secret, whispering prayers in hidden rooms, always afraid of the knock on the door that could shatter their lives. Fines, imprisonment, and constant fear became part of their existence. In time, their hearts turned to the idea of freedom. Across the sea was a land they had only heard about, a new world, wild and untamed, but promising space to live as they wished. It was not an easy choice. Leaving meant abandoning homes, land, and even the graves of loved ones. They would never again walk the familiar cobblestone streets of their towns. Never again feel the warmth of family gatherings in England. Yet for them, staying meant living without the right to worship freely. The choice was painful, but it was also clear. When the time came, they gathered what little they could carry, wooden chests, tools, a few blankets, and food for the voyage. Children clung to their mothers, and fathers held their families close as they boarded a wooden ship called the Mayflower. It was no grand vessel, just a merchant ship not meant for so many passengers, but to them it was a vessel of hope. Over 100 souls crowded into its dark, damp hold, where the smell of seawater, sickness, and fear clung to the air. For 66 days, the sea tested them. Storms raged, tossing the ship like a toy. Waves crashed over the deck, and in the darkness below, families huddled together, praying the planks would hold. Some grew ill, and not all survived the crossing. Yet amid despair, voices still rose in hymns. Every prayer whispered into the storm was a reminder of why they had left. Freedom. Finally, in November, the cry of land broke through the wind. Massachusetts lay before them, cold, rocky, and unforgiving. It was not the fertile Virginia coast they had hoped for, but it was land. When they stepped ashore, many wept, falling to their knees to kiss the frozen ground. They had crossed the sea. They were free at last, but freedom would demand a heavy price. When the Pilgrims finally stepped onto the hard, frozen soil of Massachusetts, the relief of survival quickly gave way to the weight of reality. They had no homes, no barns, no fields prepared. Before anything else, they knew they must remain united. On board the Mayflower, while still anchored in the bay, they had signed a covenant, the Mayflower Compact. It was a simple document, but its words carried power. It declared that they would govern themselves, make laws together, and stay bound as one community under God. For weary travelers who had risked everything, this promise of order was their first step toward building a life. But nature was merciless. Winter struck with icy winds that cut through their thin clothes. Snow piled deep and food was scarce. Many grew weak, and sickness spread quickly through the crowded shelters they built from rough logs and branches. Graves filled the earth faster than they could dig them. By the time spring arrived, half of the original settlers had perished. Families were torn apart, children left without parents, husbands burying wives in the frozen ground. Hope dimmed, but faith pushed them forward. Then, as the frost melted and the earth softened, came an unexpected turn of grace. Native people approached, cautious but not hostile. Among them was Squanto, a man who spoke their language after years of captivity across the ocean. To the Pilgrims, his presence felt like a miracle. Squanto taught them how to plant corn by burying fish beside the seeds to nourish the soil, how to find wild plants for food, and how to catch fish in the streams. Without his guidance, the second year might have ended like the first, with hunger and despair. That summer, for the first time, the colony saw green shoots rising strong from the earth. Cornfields swayed under the sun, and gardens yielded food that could be stored for the winter ahead. The Pilgrims gathered their harvest with tears in their eyes, their hands shaking as they held the proof of survival. They had faced death, but life had triumphed. To honor this blessing, they prepared a great feast. Tables were built from wood, and fires burned as pots of food simmered. The Wampanoag people, including their leader Massasoit, joined them. Together they shared venison, corn, fish, and wild fruits. For days, laughter replaced grief and prayers of gratitude filled the air. That moment, the first Thanksgiving, was not just about food. It was about hope reborn, about strangers finding common ground, and about the belief that even after loss, life could begin again. The joy of the first harvest carried the Pilgrims only so far. The New World was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving, and survival was a constant struggle. As autumn ended, cold winds swept across Plymouth and winter descended like an invisible enemy. Snow blanketed the ground, rivers froze, and the settlers realized the hard truth. Life here would never be easy. Food stores dwindled rapidly, and hunting became harder as game grew scarce. Hunger settled into their bones, gnawing quietly but persistently at children and adults alike. At night, the colony was filled with soft cries. Children shivered in thin blankets, their stomachs empty, while parents whispered promises of spring that felt impossibly far away. Fires burned low as families huddled close for warmth. Those who could ration food did so, giving their own portions to the young, the sick, or the elderly. Others slipped quietly into death, leaving grief-stricken families behind to continue the fight. Each loss weighed heavily on the hearts of the survivors, a grim reminder of the cost of freedom. Disease followed closely behind hunger. The cold and damp made bodies weak, and small illnesses spread quickly through cramped shelters. Even the simplest tasks, chopping wood, carrying water, tending a fire, became battles against exhaustion and frostbite. Every day demanded strength they sometimes didn't feel they had. Yet even in these moments of despair, faith was their anchor. The Pilgrims prayed tirelessly, believing that God had brought them across the ocean not to abandon them, but to teach resilience through suffering. As the snow finally melted, revealing patches of green beneath, the settlers breathed a quiet sigh of relief. Spring brought life back to the frozen land, a slow but steady reminder that survival was possible. Though their bodies were worn and their spirits battered, the Pilgrims pressed on. They planted new crops, repaired shelters, and honored those who had passed by, tending graves and sharing stories of those lost. Every action became a testament to their perseverance, a declaration that they would endure against all odds. Through the harsh winters and relentless hunger, the Pilgrims learned lessons that went beyond survival. They discovered patience, courage, and the power of unity. Every seed planted, every meal shared, and every prayer whispered into the cold wind was a triumph of human will. They had crossed an ocean in search of freedom, faced death, and survived, and though the world around them was harsh and uncertain, they had proven that hope could take root even in the harshest soil. The early days of friendship with native tribes had given the Pilgrims a glimmer of hope. Squanto's guidance and the Wampanoag's support had helped them survive the first deadly winters. Yet peace was fragile, and the Pilgrims quickly realized that not all native people viewed their arrival as welcome. To the tribes whose lands had been theirs for generations, the newcomers were strangers who cleared forests, built homes, and planted crops that disrupted the delicate balance of the land. Rumors and whispers of betrayal began to spread, and fear crept into every interaction. The Pilgrims, already cautious from the hardships they had endured, responded by fortifying their settlement. Wooden palisades rose along the edges of Plymouth, not just as defense but as symbols of their unease. Every rustle in the nearby forest, every unfamiliar face became a question of threat or friendship. Daily life was no longer only about planting and harvesting, it was about vigilance. Children played under watchful eyes, and even routine tasks were shadowed by suspicion. Misunderstandings, small at first, began to escalate. A misinterpreted gesture or a broken promise could spiral into tension. Arguments over hunting grounds, fishing spots, or the right to gather firewood sometimes erupted into violence. Trust, which had taken weeks to build, was delicate and easily broken. Some native leaders, wary of the settlers' intentions, kept their distance, while others approached with caution, but suspicion. Every conversation carried the weight of uncertainty, every encounter a silent test of loyalty and intent. Yet even amidst this tension, bonds remained. Leaders like Massasoit, the Wampanoag Sachem, worked tirelessly to maintain peace. They reminded both sides of the fragile but invaluable alliance that had helped the Pilgrims survive. The settlers, though wary, learned to negotiate, communicate, and compromise. They discovered that survival was not only about crops and shelter, but about navigating the intricate and often delicate relationships with those whose land they now inhabited. The Pilgrims began to understand a hard truth. Freedom was never guaranteed, and even a place of safety could feel precarious. Every decision carried consequences. Every interaction held potential risk. But through careful diplomacy, patience, and respect, they managed to maintain a fragile coexistence. This period of tension was a lesson in humility, resilience, and the complexities of forging a new life on land that was never truly theirs. Through fear and uncertainty, the Pilgrims learned that survival demanded more than strength. It required understanding, patience, and the courage to extend trust even when it felt impossible. Through storms, hunger, sickness, and tension, the Pilgrims endured. Their journey across the ocean and their first harsh winters had tested them in ways they could never have imagined. Families were broken, lives were lost, and yet those who remained carried on, driven by a determination that seemed almost miraculous. Every sunrise was a reminder that they had survived. And every small victory, a sprouting seed, a successful hunt, a warm fire, became a reason to give thanks. In the autumn following their first full harvest, the Pilgrims decided to celebrate. It was a simple feast, but it carried profound meaning. Wooden tables were set under the open sky, fires crackled, and the aroma of roasted meat and baked corn filled the air. They invited the Wampanoag people, including their leader Massasoit, whose guidance and friendship had been essential to their survival. Together they shared food, laughter, and stories, creating a moment of unity and gratitude that transcended differences. This was not merely a meal, it was a symbol of resilience, cooperation, and hope in the face of unimaginable challenges. For the Pilgrims, Thanksgiving became a testament to the power of perseverance. Every prayer whispered into the cold wind during those early winters, every tear shed beside a grave, every meal stretched so that children could eat, all culminated in this moment of shared triumph. They had crossed an ocean seeking freedom, faced death and despair, and carved a life from an unforgiving land. Their story was no longer just one of survival. It was a story of faith, endurance, and the human spirit's capacity to endure. The legacy of Plymouth Colony did not end with that first Thanksgiving. Their efforts laid the groundwork for self-governance, community, and cooperation. The Mayflower Compact, signed months before they ever set foot on land, became a symbol of collective responsibility and democratic ideals. Their struggles inspired future generations, and their triumphs reminded the world that courage and determination could transform hardship into hope. Today, Thanksgiving is celebrated as a holiday of gratitude. But beneath the traditions lies a deeper lesson. The Pilgrim's journey reminds us that freedom is rarely easy, that survival often requires sacrifice, and that the human spirit can prevail even in the darkest of times. Their story endures as a symbol of perseverance, a beacon for all who face obstacles, and a testament to what can be achieved when people dare to dream, struggle, and remain steadfast in the pursuit of something greater than themselves. The Pilgrims' journey was far from easy. They crossed an ocean, endured freezing winters, and faced hunger and disease that claimed nearly half of their people. Yet through faith, courage, and determination, they survived. They built a new life on unfamiliar land, formed bonds with allies, and celebrated the first harvest in gratitude, a tradition we now call Thanksgiving. Their story reminds us that perseverance and hope can overcome even the greatest hardships. Today we honor their legacy, remembering that freedom, sacrifice, and resilience are gifts worth fighting for, and that even in darkness, hope can light the way.